Hi, everyone. My name is Rabindra Hayashi, and I'm the Events Production Coordinator at CAM. I'm so happy to be here with you today. You just watched Mixed. A little more than 50 years ago, after the landmark Loving versus Virginia U.S. Supreme Court case ended in legal persecution of interracial marriage in America, two mothers, one brown and one white, set off on a journey to explore what it means to be a biracial child in a moment of heightened racial division and tension, the perspectives of their own families and others, and America's deep cultural ambivalence about its rapidly changing mixed race reality. In the shadows of Ferguson and Black Lives Matter and the historic Obama presidency, Mixed offers a new lens into race and the lives of the first generation of mixed race kids and families to be counted in the US Census. We would like to thank our sponsors for this event, Comcast Xfinity and Bloomberg. I'd like to get started now by welcoming Leena Jayaswal, and Caty Borum Chattoo.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
I would just want to start, one of the questions that I had when I started watching this, especially as someone who is mixed race myself, I wanted to know more about your decision to make a film. I know a lot of mixed race people like me, and we have not yet made a documentary. So was there a moment that spurred you to make a documentary about this?
Well, so I guess I'll start. I had done a piece called I'm Not the Nanny. So once my son was born, in DC in particular, I would take him to parks and play with him, and people just assumed I was the nanny. And his dad, who was white, would take him places and would get lauded as being a great, wonderful father, which he is. But, I'm also a great, wonderful mother. And
not the nanny.
And not the nanny. And so I had done this piece, and I'm not quite sure how Caty heard about it, but she did. And we worked together. We're both professors at American University in the School of Communication. And she came up to me and she showed me a picture of her kids and said, "These are my kids." And I said, now the completely inappropriate thing, they don't look like you at all. and she and I she's had a long storied history in documentary, and she and I just started talking, and we were like, I would love to do something further, and she also wanted to do something further. I'll let you take it over from here. Yeah.
Oh, Leena tells the story perfectly. I'll just add here that I had been thinking about, obviously you all just saw the movie, so you see my kids and you see their dad in the film, and you also learn this from the movie. He is Trinidadian, so of Caribbean descent, French West Indies, so Black and Indian. And, it was a different kind of experience for me as a white mom of brown children, really experiencing, if I'm honest, some of the first, what I would call moments where I could see the visibility of how races lived in America through comments that people would make to my children. And like Leena, they'd be like what we would call like weird, well-meaning, that I'm not the nanny, that's not well-meaning, but like weird, people saying like your children are so exotic. And the one that really got me was just truly surprised me, as a white woman in America, just the number of times people wanted to ask my daughter in particular what she was right in front of her. And I always thought I was like, she's right here. Like she can hear you making her sound dehumanized, like the way that you would ask, like, what is this creature? It was so odd. And so I just had been, I had been a mama for about, I don't know, I guess at that point, like a decade. My kids were like 10 and 8 or something like that. And I had been thinking about this experience and thinking, well, there's nothing that really captures what my kids are experiencing. Not the story of a white mama figuring it out, like who cares, but really the story of these kids. And it was so amazing when I heard about Leena's a award-winning photographer, I can't remember if that's in the movie, but anyway. And so hearing about her photography exhibit, it just really resonated with me. And sometimes the universe puts two people together for a reason. And we always like to say that one of the beautiful stories about our film is that Leena and I became really, really close friends and sisters. And we learned so much about this experience together. And I truly can't imagine having such a vulnerable experience about your kids. You know, they're your most important people in your life, like going through this learning experience that was the process of making of a film. So I would say, just to end that long-winded part two, I think there was no way we were not going to make this movie. Once we knew that Leena was making photography about this, I'm a writer, so I was sort of writing essays that I didn't publish, you know, I was just sitting on them. And so by the time we figured that out, it was just no way this movie was not going to be made.
And I'd also add, at the time when we started, there was very few representations in media of mixed race. I mean, we saw things on Modern Family and Parenthood, but the closest thing that my son had to his experience was actually a cartoon, Sanjay and Craig on Nickelodeon. And so now, gratefully, you know, we're seeing so much more representation of what it means to be mixed race. But when we first started, that was another impetus for us to want to help this story go, you know, to be heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing everything. And as as someone who has had a lot of those experiences, I mean, I really empathize with the, what do you call it, the "I'm not the nanny" notion very strongly. My mother has talked about many times about trying to specify, like, oh no, my children are not adopted, like, especially as someone who was like born in the 90s. Like, that was
Yes.
that's a very common sentiment.
I got that a lot too, constantly. Where are they adopted from? It was like, well, I had 2 C-sections. So, I mean, not that, listen, adoption is a beautiful thing, but I was like, I worked hard to get these children out. But yes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so then
we interrupt.
Oh no. It was that's I wanted to ask a little bit more on that idea of like people assuming that your children are not related to you. And you also mentioned like you started seeing things differently, and it was your first time of contending with like the ways that like racialized experience exists in America, as someone who had not been conscious to that or necessarily been visible to that. So I was going to ask, actually, as you were making this documentary, you were already sort of in the beginnings of that, but for both of you, how did that kind of change? Were there moments where you had recognition of like, wow, my child's experience is really quite different from my own, through the making of this documentary?
I think, so our kids were pretty young. And now I think, now that they're older, I can start to, at least from my experience, I can start to see where my son is starting to have similar experiences. When we first started making the film, he was 5, I believe. And so he didn't really think about identity. You know, I mean, we talked about race in the house a lot, especially when Trayvon Martin happened and, you know, all the things that were going on. So I have this other photo series that I made where he's playing with his toy car. This is a true story. He was playing with his toy cars and he said, Mommy, I have a game I want to play with you. And I said, oh, what is it? And he said, it's called racism. You race your car and I race mine, but you never win. And I was like, oh boy, do you know, like, I mean, so
that's it.
So he couldn't really think about race on that level. Right. But now he's starting to really feel his identity, and he's starting to really understand which parts are what and where he feels more comfortable in certain situations. And I can see him, he doesn't know it, he doesn't have a language, but I can see him code switching from family to family. And he doesn't know he's doing that, but he is doing it. And so that was something I probably didn't even recognize that I was doing within my own life. But now I'm much more acutely aware of when he's doing it.
It's, obviously Leena and I have very different lived experiences based on who we each are in the world. But I would say something similar with my kids. I mean, one of the reasons that, just to state the obvious, that we thought it was important to make the film, it's not just that we wanted to do it, but we really had a feeling that the mixed race experience is different, right? That we wouldn't even know, that even Leena, as a brown woman in America, wouldn't necessarily know the experience of her son because he has a white half, right? So, so all of that was really interesting for us. And I would say the same thing, Leena. Now my son is 16 and I definitely watch him code switch for sure. And the other thing that's interesting here, we had to make a lot of, making a film. Eventually you have to make all these creative choices about what are you not including, even if they're an important part of it, but cultural differences that are not just about the lived experience of race in America, but it's very conscious of my children having a very strong connection to their dad, who was born in Trinidad, and became a citizen, many years later, but he lived a life in Trinidad. They're very connected to Caribbean culture and the food that their dad makes. And I'm a sort of classic European mutt. My family, Scottish, Irish, and French, have been here for 200 years, right? So at that point, all of my cultural things that my family, my ancestors might have had, have gotten all mashed up into just, hot dogs on the 4th of July, So that's all interesting, watching them navigate like this rich cultural history of their brown side, beautiful food and culture and music and all of that. And then on their mom's side, they're like, well, what you got? I'm like, I don't know, whiteness. And I haven't totally.
Well, you have privilege. There you go.
Yeah, privileged children. So yeah, that's neither here nor there, but it's just an interesting commentary. I'm happy for my children that they have such a beautiful cultural heritage to draw from that has meaning for them. And as they get older, I see that has a lot of deep meaning for them in terms of like the foods that they eat and how they communicate and code switch and all of that.
That's a really interesting point too, especially you were talking about, there were a lot of things that you took out. And I actually really wanted to know, like, when I was seeing all these different clips, I was like, there must be so much conversation that was cut out. So like, was there like one particular thing that you remember that you were like, oh, this almost made it in, or like something that like you really wanted to have in there, or you couldn't figure out how to work in that you really remember strongly?
I don't know if there's one particular incident, but I would say that both Caty and I were extremely protective of our kids. And so while we know that that's what people want to watch and see, we're also moms first. And so what they agree to when when Dev was 5 versus what you would say to now as a 12-year-old, we had to do some protecting. So there was a little bit of like, we don't want them to be on camera as much. We don't want, we want them. I think also there was a perception that if you're mixed race, there's got to be you've got to have an identity problem, or you have to have, something like that. And that was not our experiences of our kids. And so we were not going to hype something up for tension in a film that didn't exist. And that's why we kind of think this film is a little sleepy film. It's not it's not a film where people are going to be like,
yeah.
And then the bad thing happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
there were some, Leena's exactly right. I think there probably are a number of moments that we talked about not including, just because we were thinking that our children would grow up and they might not want certain conversations they had when they were 10 years old, truly trying to figure out their own mixed race experience. So it's probably things like that. I mean, there were a number of stories that probably happened off camera. Like, I shared with Leena this experience and we did not include this in the film, but now I'm telling the story. So now it's here. But, my son, when he was in elementary school, I would get one call a year, I want to say, from the teacher who would or like an email that would use this language for him. It's like, my son is the most chill kid ever. Y'all saw the movie. He's like real chill. He's just never been he's not loud, he just goes with the flow. And I would get some kind of email that used these words, like aggressive, blah, blah, blah. Like he was playing with other boys and the language. And I started to pick up on this pattern. And then I would just say, as I became more and more in the know and understanding, I would just call and say, what color were the other boys that you're talking about? And it was always when he was playing with other kids of color. And I thought, oh, there's like different And first of all, I was like, what are these words that you're using that are very different when he plays with white kids versus kids of color? And And that's not something that we filmed, but it was something that happened while we were filming. And I remember telling Leena about it and us kind of thinking about, whether to put that in. But, out of, I think, respect for my son living his life and maybe not needing to have that moment and his mom's response to it, but it was very interesting. I did buy the school a book on subconscious unconscious bias. That was fun. I said it in a friendly way, but I was like, you might want to beef up on this information.
I really appreciate, though, what you mentioned there about not wanting to make drama where there isn't any, because like that was something that sort of came out in the film too, from a few different figures who were saying like it's not about being half and half, it's about being 100% and 100%, and there doesn't necessarily need to be that. And that's something that I feel, but I definitely remember like late 90s people being like, you're gonna have an identity crisis, and like setting me down. But that was back at the time when they were still, parenting advice often said that like teaching two languages is going to be confusing for your child.
And was it from, did you get that from people who were not mixed race?
Yeah,
who were saying, yeah, of course.
I mean, this is like the sort of like funny thing about being mixed race in general. Like I remember, experiences were like going to a sensitivity training where they're like, would you date someone outside your race? And I was like, every date I do is a date outside my race. Like, that's all there is to it. But something I wanted, going back to the documentary, I actually really was interested because you traveled all over the United States to conduct these interviews. And different areas of the United States have really distinct histories regarding race and racialization and the governance surrounding that. So what were some regional differences that occurred or that you noticed when you were having conversations?
Well, one thing I'll start off by saying is that when we were producing this, and this is where our own unconscious bias pops up, is that when we would find a story and we would, want to pursue it and see if somebody would meet with us and talk with us, inevitably, if the story was led by somebody white, then Caty would take the lead. And if it was led by somebody who was a person of color, then I would be the one reaching out. And we didn't probably till about halfway through the filming, we realized that's what we were doing. And
it's not on purpose.
But I think subconsciously we were thinking, well, we're making a film about race. And if a white lady is reaching out to a person of color saying, I want to talk to you about race, then maybe the reaction might not be the same. Or if a brown lady is reaching out to a white person being like, I want to put you on camera and have you talking about race, then again, maybe that reaction would also not be the same. So whether or not it was subconscious or unconscious, it seemed to work for us because and then when we both decided a year into the film that we were going to be in the film, that also shifted and changed because then it allowed the people that we filmed to feel like that we're also being vulnerable. It wasn't that we were asking and not partaking in that way. So that was one of the interesting things. I think if it was up to me, if we had a bigger budget and more time, we made this film. We're both full-time professors, and so we really made this film during summers most of the time. And if we had a bigger budget and were able to film more, I would have really liked to have access to hit what you were saying. I don't think we hit it enough personally.
Yeah.
I would have loved to go to more of the regions in the United States and to really explore that concept that you're asking. I think we hit a little bit of it, like when we go down south, and we see how some Southerners, we don't want to generalize, but some Southerners talk about race versus when we go up north to Cleveland and how race is talked about there. It's different. So, yeah.
Oh, I don't have any.
That's fine. So I actually had another question that was very similar, but it was another one. As someone who grew up in the 90s, and I remember when there was finally a mixed race box for me to check in standardized texts.
Yes.
And I remember when the first time I saw that you could check one or more races as an option, even though I have a funny story about being fingerprinted, but that is not for this Q&A. just, yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to ask is like whether you felt that there was a difference in the way people responded to questions or like a trend that you saw based on their age.
Ooh. Yes. Right, Leena? Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, actually, what a great question. Thank you for that. Yes, I would say, well, I mean, you can see there are several groups of young people in their early 20s, like, like the swirl group at Duke University, where we're there with the amazing mixed race scholar, Dr. Sarah Gaither, and then the other scene with the Blasian narratives who come out of Spelman and Morehouse in Atlanta, obviously historically Black colleges. And all of those young people were like way smarter. I mean, they were so deep and profound and full of nuance in how they understood their identity and how people see them. And you could see that in both of those scenes, these young people are really funny also when they talk about it, right? And they can have fun. And the young woman in the Duke Swirls thing who was talking about how like her family would be seated for dinner and the person would give the check and say like, how do I wear it? She would say, I'm 14, I can't take the check. So I think the young people by far, I mean, not to use a cliche, and obviously we're both professors, so we love young people, but man, let them lead the way. They are, and I think some older people, not the ones in our film necessarily, but sort of, they're the ones that would still want to do the sort of, well, it's going to be hard, it's going to be hard. It's like, well, based on your experience, I mean, that's young people, I think by far had a deeper, nuanced, intimate takes on the multi-layers of their identity and intersectionality and just a language for it and a gentleness with it and a sense of humor, which we learned a lot from them.
And I would also say, so the folks that were Caty and I's generation or older, we probably bought into the idea because, I mean, it's a racist idea, that it's still like, oh, your kids are going to have a hard time because they're mixed race. Like, I mean, those were things that were probably in our histories as we were growing up. And part of us probably felt that too, right? Like, well, I am marrying outside my race. What is going to happen, to that? And I think that just it's ingrained racism that, just gets passed down through the history.
Yes.
But when you see people our generation talking, and we're really thinking that, there's going to be these big struggles and all these things. And then you ask one of the young girls, I just remember like, what do people call you at school? And she's like, they call me nothing, there is nothing there. And so that generation, I love our wonderful, wonderful editor, Charlene Rule, did an incredible job about sort of setting it up. And this was all very natural, that the kids had no issues or concerns, right? Our kids, the kids that we interviewed, they don't see this as an issue or a problem or any of that. And really it's the older generation that's putting it upon them. And so that's one thing I loved about how she edited the film, was to really make a clear distinction between the generational shifts in thinking.
Yeah, and I think that really comes out, which sort of leads to the question of like, when you show this film to like your friends, your family, like these are very personal films, like how have people reacted to the film?
I think the coolest thing, I'll just do a little tiny answer and then make all the space for Leena. But I think the coolest thing is when mixed race and biracial people see the film, they're the ones who come up and say, I just never saw anything about my experience represented. And we feel like it is really for them, in addition to parents who, are raising mixed race kids. You don't want to accidentally harm them by, as you learned in the film, doing things like, well, you have to choose a side. You have to like choose one that you're more of, which is damaging for this is Sarah Gaither's work. We are not making that up. That's not conjecture. Their sort of feelings of self-esteem can be harmed somewhat when they're kind of forced by outside others to kind of decide that they're one thing over the other. But I think we felt most gratified by other multiracial people saying, we really appreciate seeing some reflection of this. It's not that it's the entirety of the spectrum. And of course, there's many different ways that a person can be multiracial and multicultural. But I think that's, for us, I think the most gratifying.
And I'll just say for me, this was, my son saw the film for the first time in October, and it was in a movie theater, and he was sitting behind me, and in one emotional scene, he reached over where he could see that I'm emotional on screen. He reached over and just squeezed my shoulder. And then after the film was done, he said, the first thing he said to me was, "Mommy, thank you for making this film for me." And I was like, "I'm done. That's the review. That's the only review I needed." And that was it. This film was for me and for Caty to really figure out how to be the best moms we can to these little people that we love so dearly.
That's really sweet. And it's so great talking to you. And I really would love to keep talking about this, especially because, as I mentioned, this is very much my own experience. But unfortunately, we are sort of running out of time. And so I wanted to make sure that I make space before we go for both Caty and Leena. For people who love this documentary, for people who want to learn more about it, or people who just want to follow your work, know what's coming next for you. What are you working on now, and how can people follow it? And I'm going to throw it to Caty first.
Oh, well, Leena and I do dream of what our second project will be. We don't know what that is. It might be something on lipstick. I don't know. But we do love working together. And of course, we both have separate bodies of work. I direct an organization that a lot of documentary people know called the Center for Media and Social Impact. And we do a lot of research. And I'm very proud to say we do most of the research on diversity and representation in documentary as a form of hopefully activism to shift the playing field. So we have a big study coming out in the next couple months that looks at, for the first time ever, the representation issues of directors and major protagonists in the entire streaming age of documentary. So we're really proud of that. And then I also do a lot of work in comedy and social justice. And I have a new book coming out in January called The Revolution Will Be Hilarious. Oh, look at that. There it is on screen. And it's more about the role of artists and creative people in helping us to create a more just and kind world. Lots of other stuff too, but those are both good to talk about.
Thank you so much, Caty. How about you, Leena?
So currently, if you come to DC and you want to go to the Smithsonian, the Arts and Industry Building has reopened after 20 plus years. And the exhibition that's there is called the Futures exhibition. And I have a short film that is part of the exhibition there it's called Dreaming Green. And it is about my friend and fellow artist activist, Monica Jahan Bose. And we explore climate justice issues and artists' perspectives, especially combining Brown and Black communities in climate justice. And so that's the film. And then you can follow us for Mixed, more news on Mixed. We have a Facebook group, Facebook page, the Mixed documentary, and then our own documentary page is, I think, mixeddocumentary.com. And you can, if you want to see silly pictures of my kid, you can follow me on Instagram. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we will all be delighted to see all sorts of pictures of either of your kids, since you were so, generous to share some time with them, with us. So I want to say thank you again to both of you for being here. And to our audience, I want to say once again, thank you for watching Mixed at CAMFest 40. CAMFest 40 runs from May 12th to May 22nd. So do be sure to check out our other programming. It is in person and virtual. And once again, I'd like to thank Caty and Leena for being here today.
Thank you so much. And thanks especially to Cam.
Yes, thank you. We could not have finished this film without Cam.
No.
Our superheroes.
We're so glad that we were able to help, and that we're so glad that we're able to screen your film as well. All right, take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your festival.